"Sir, step away from that door, because I am not going to tell you again." The command cut through the marble hallway of the federal courthouse, just as 74-year-old Walter Bennett reached for the envelope he had nearly dropped. He stopped immediately. Around him, attorneys moved between courtrooms carrying files. Clerks hurried past with folders pressed against their chests, and visitors waited beneath the quiet glow of overhead lights. Walter looked toward Officer Richard Harlan, a white courthouse police officer standing several feet away with an expression that suggested the matter had already been decided. Walter wore a modest brown suit, polished shoes, and the navy tie his late wife had given him years earlier. A visitor pass was clipped clearly to his jacket. He had passed through security downstairs without difficulty. He had been given directions to this floor. Yet somehow, Harlan was looking at him as though none of that mattered. "Officer, I am waiting for my son," Walter said. His voice was calm, measured by 74 years of learning that raising your voice rarely made another person listen more carefully. "Your son can meet you downstairs," Harlan replied. "This area is restricted." Walter glanced toward the courtroom door. "The security officer downstairs told me I could wait here." Harlan stepped closer. "And I am telling you to move." Imagine standing in a courthouse, a building designed around evidence and facts, while someone decides what you are before asking enough questions to know who you are. Walter had lived long enough to recognize that feeling. He did not enjoy it, but he knew it. "I have a visitor pass," he said, touching the card on his jacket. Harlan barely looked at it. "That does not give you access wherever you want." "I never said it did." Walter held up a sealed legal envelope. "My son left this at my house last night. He needs it this morning." Near the clerk's station, Jennifer Reed looked up from her computer. She had seen Walter pass through the approved security checkpoint earlier. She started toward them, but Harlan raised one hand without looking at her. "I have this handled." Walter noticed that. He noticed Jennifer stop. He noticed two attorneys glance over and then quickly return to their conversation. Most of all, he noticed how easily a misunderstanding was becoming something else. "Officer Harlan," Walter said after reading the nameplate, "you can verify everything I have told you in less than a minute." Harlan's expression hardened. "You do not tell me what I can verify." Walter took a slow breath. The envelope remained steady in his hand. "Then what exactly would you like me to do?" "Leave this hallway." Walter looked toward the courtroom again. The door would open when recess began. Marcus had told him to wait nearby. Walter had promised. "I will move to the benches," he said. "But I am staying on this floor until my son comes out." Harlan gave a short laugh. "You really think your son is going to change anything here?" Walter studied him for a moment. There was no anger in his face now, only disappointment. "I think my son is going to want your name." Harlan pointed toward the nameplate on his uniform. "There it is." Walter nodded. "Good." Harlan leaned slightly closer, still convinced he controlled every part of the encounter. "And if your son has a problem with me, tell him to come ask me himself." Walter looked past him toward the closed courtroom door. He knew Marcus would eventually walk through it. What Harlan did not know was that Marcus Bennett would not be coming through that door simply as Walter's son. He would be coming through it as an assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor who had spent his career asking people to answer for their decisions. Walter lowered his eyes to the envelope and said nothing. Harlan mistook the silence for surrender. It was the first mistake he understood. It would not be the last. 3 hours earlier, Walter Bennett stood in the small kitchen of his brick townhouse in Northern Virginia, pouring coffee into the same blue ceramic mug he had used for nearly 20 years. Morning sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, touching the framed family photographs arranged beside the window. At 74, Walter moved more slowly than he once had, but there was still a deliberate steadiness in everything he did. He had spent 36 years working as a maintenance supervisor for the county school system, waking before sunrise, repairing whatever other people depended on, and returning home each evening to a family he considered his greatest accomplishment. His wife, Evelyn, had been gone for 4 years now, but her presence remained everywhere. Her favorite chair still faced the backyard. Her handwritten recipes remained inside a kitchen drawer, and the navy tie she had bought Walter for their 40th anniversary still hung carefully in his bedroom closet. His phone rang at 7:06 that morning. Walter glanced at the screen and smiled before answering. "You forgot something." Marcus Bennett laughed softly on the other end. "Good morning to you too, Dad." Walter looked toward a sealed legal envelope resting on the counter. Marcus had stopped by for dinner the night before and left it beside his coffee cup. I found your envelope about 10 minutes after you left. I know. I realized it when I got to the office. Marcus sounded tired. He had been preparing for an important federal court proceeding for several days. I can send someone for it. Walter took another sip of coffee. Your office is 25 minutes away. I can bring it. Dad, you do not have to do that. You said it was important. There was a pause. It is. Then stop arguing with a 74-year-old man before breakfast. Marcus laughed again, and Walter smiled. Their relationship had always carried that rhythm, affection hidden inside teasing, pride rarely spoken because both men already understood it. Walter had worked overtime when Marcus was young, sometimes taking weekend shifts so his son could attend college without carrying the same financial worries Walter had known. Years later, when Marcus graduated from law school, Walter had sat beside Evelyn in the audience with tears he made no effort to hide. But Walter had never been impressed by titles alone. When Marcus became an assistant United States attorney, his father gave him the same advice he had offered when Marcus was a teenager. The law means nothing if dignity only belongs to powerful people. Marcus had never forgotten it. I should be in court by 9, Marcus said. Security can direct you upstairs. I will probably be inside by the time you arrive, so just wait near the courtroom. I will come out during recess. Understood. And Dad? Yes. Thank you. Walter looked toward Evelyn's photograph. Your mother would tell me I spoiled you. She would be right. The call ended, leaving Walter alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic. He finished his coffee, carried the mug to the sink, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, he returned wearing his brown suit and Evelyn's navy tie. He placed the envelope carefully inside a leather document sleeve, checked that he had his wallet and reading glasses, then locked the front door behind him. The air outside was cool, about 58 degrees, and the sky over Northern Virginia was clear. Walter had no reason to expect trouble. He was simply a father delivering something his son had forgotten. By 8:18, he was driving toward the federal courthouse, unaware that before the morning was over, the lesson he had spent decades teaching Marcus would be tested in the very building where the law was supposed to mean the most. Walter arrived at the federal courthouse at 8:47 that morning, 20 minutes earlier than he had planned. The building rose above the street in pale stone and glass, formal without being grand, its wide steps already busy with attorneys, federal employees, witnesses, and visitors moving through the morning rush. Walter adjusted Evelyn's navy tie, tucked the leather document sleeve beneath one arm, and joined the security line. When his turn came, he placed his keys, wallet, and reading glasses into a tray, followed every instruction, and waited patiently while officers completed the screening process. Nothing unusual happened. A security employee checked Walter's identification, asked the purpose of his visit, and listened as Walter explained that he was delivering documents to his son, who was participating in a proceeding upstairs. Which courtroom? The employee asked. Walter took out his phone and read the number Marcus had sent him. The employee pointed toward the elevators. 4th floor. Check with the clerk when you get there. Walter thanked him. Before leaving the security area, he was issued a visitor pass and clipped it neatly to the front of his brown suit jacket. By 8:55, he stepped from the elevator onto the 4th floor. The atmosphere was quieter there. Shoes clicked softly against polished stone. Attorneys spoke in lowered voices near wooden benches. A court clerk carried a stack of files through a secured doorway. Walter checked the courtroom numbers until he found the one Marcus had given him. A sign near the entrance indicated that proceedings were already underway. Walter did exactly what his son had asked. He waited. At the clerk's station, Jennifer Reed noticed him standing nearby and offered a professional smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "I am waiting for my son," Walter said, holding up the sealed envelope. "He left something important at my house." Jennifer glanced at his visitor pass. "Is he inside?" "Yes, ma'am." Marcus Bennett. Recognition crossed her face. "Mr. Bennett is in the proceeding. They should take a recess before too long." She pointed toward a row of benches about 15 feet away. "You are welcome to wait there." "Thank you." Walter sat down, placed the document sleeve across his knees, and watched courthouse life move around him. For nearly 10 minutes, nobody questioned him. Nobody treated his presence as unusual. Then Officer Richard Harlan came around the corner. Harlan had been assigned to courthouse security for several years. At 43, he carried himself with the rigid confidence of someone accustomed to giving instructions and expecting immediate compliance. His eyes moved across the hallway and settled on Walter. Walter was no longer sitting. An attorney had stopped near the benches to organize several files, so Walter had stood and moved closer to the courtroom wall to give her room. He was still several feet from the door, his visitor pass visible, the envelope tucked beneath his arm. Harlan watched him for a moment before approaching. "Sir, what are you doing here?" Walter turned. "Waiting for my son." Harlan looked toward the courtroom door, then back. At Walter. "This hallway is for court business." Walter glanced around at the benches where Jennifer had specifically told him to wait. "Yes, officer. I am here on court business." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "What business?" Walter lifted the envelope slightly. "Delivering this to my son when the court takes a recess." Harlan did not ask his son's name. He did not speak to Jennifer. He did not examine the visitor pass clipped to Walter's jacket. Instead, his expression hardened as though Walter's explanation had confirmed a suspicion rather than answered a question. "You need to move away from that courtroom." Walter looked at the officer, then at the bench Jennifer had directed him to less than 10 minutes earlier. He felt the first quiet warning inside himself, the familiar sense that facts were beginning to matter less than assumptions. Still, he kept his voice polite. "Officer, security cleared me downstairs, and the clerk told me to wait right here." Harlan took another look at Walter and said, "I am telling you something different now." Across the hallway, Jennifer Reed lifted her eyes from her computer. She had heard every word. Jennifer Reed rose from her chair before Walter could respond. "Officer Harlan, he was cleared downstairs," she said, keeping her voice low enough not to disturb the courtroom. "I told him he could wait by the benches." Harlan turned toward her with a brief look of irritation. "I have it handled, Jennifer. I understand, but his visitor pass is valid." Walter glanced at the pass clipped to his jacket, then back at Harlan. The officer barely looked at it. That was what troubled Walter most. This was no longer about missing information. The information was standing directly in front of him, offered calmly, supported by a court employee, and still Harlan seemed determined to trust his first assumption. "Officer," Walter said, "if I am standing somewhere I should not be, tell me where I am allowed to wait, and I will go there." It was a reasonable offer. Jennifer knew it. Two attorneys standing near the opposite wall knew it. Even Harlan seemed to understand it, because he paused before answering. "You can go back downstairs." Walter frowned slightly. "Why downstairs?" "Because this floor is busy." Walter looked around. Visitors sat on benches farther down the corridor. A woman quietly read documents near the elevators. An older couple waited beside another courtroom. Nothing about the floor suggested visitors were prohibited. "The clerk told me to wait here," Walter said, "and my son told me he would meet me here during recess." Harlan stepped into Walter's line of sight. "I do not care what your son told you." The words were sharper now. Jennifer's expression changed. Walter noticed several people looking toward them. He disliked public scenes. At 74, he had learned that dignity was sometimes less about winning an argument than refusing to become the version of yourself someone else expected. "Then call downstairs," Walter said. "Verify my clearance. Ask Miss Reed. Check my identification. I will cooperate with all of it." Harlan gave a short breath through his nose. "You have an answer for everything." Walter looked at him steadily. "I am answering your questions." That landed differently. For a moment, Harlan said nothing. Then his eyes dropped to the leather document sleeve beneath Walter's arm. "What is in there?" "Documents belonging to my son." "Let me see them." Walter shook his head once. "I do not believe I should hand over sealed legal documents without knowing whether you are authorized to review them." Harlan's expression tightened. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "No, officer. I am asking you to verify the situation." Jennifer stepped closer. "Officer Harlan, I can confirm with the courtroom deputy right now." "Stay out of it," Harlan said. The hallway became quieter. Walter looked at Jennifer and saw something familiar in her face. The uncomfortable calculation people made when they knew a situation was going wrong, but were deciding how much professional risk they were willing to accept to stop it. Walter had seen that silence before. He had seen it in workplaces, stores, offices, and ordinary moments that never became headlines. Sometimes prejudice announced itself loudly. Sometimes it survived because everyone nearby decided someone else should. "Challenge it." Walter turned back to Harlan. You have my visitor pass. You have a clerk confirming where I was told to wait. You have security downstairs that can verify why I am here. What information are you still missing? Harlan stared at him. I am not missing anything. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. Then this is not about information. One of the attorneys across the hallway stopped pretending not to listen. Jennifer remained standing. Harlan's face hardened. Move away from the courtroom door. Walter nodded calmly and took several steps toward the bench, exactly as instructed. Then he sat down with the envelope resting across his knees. He had complied. There could be no confusion about that. But Harlan followed him. And in that moment, Walter understood that the location had never really been the problem. Walter remained seated, the sealed envelope resting across his knees, while Officer Harlan stood several feet in front of him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Walter had followed the instruction exactly. He had moved away from the courtroom door. His visitor pass remained visible. Jennifer Reed had confirmed that he was permitted to wait on the floor. Yet Harlan stayed there, watching him as though compliance had somehow created another problem. Is there something else, officer? Walter asked. Harlan folded his arms. I am trying to understand why you are so determined to stay up here. Walter looked toward the courtroom. I have explained that several times. You said your son is inside. Yes. What is his name? Walter paused. It was the first useful question Harlan had asked. Marcus Bennett. Harlan showed no recognition. And what exactly does Marcus Bennett do? Walter looked back at him. He works here. Harlan gave a faint, skeptical smile. Doing what? Before Walter could answer, the courtroom door opened. A clerk stepped into the hallway and announced a recess. The quiet corridor immediately changed. Attorneys began gathering folders. Visitors stood. Voices returned in low waves. Walter rose from the bench, believing Marcus might appear at any moment. He held the envelope securely and took 2 steps toward the open area near the courtroom entrance. Harlan moved into his path. I told you to stay back. Walter stopped. The court is in recess. My son is coming out. Then he can find you downstairs. Officer Harlan, I have complied with every reasonable instruction you have given me. Walter's voice remained controlled, but there was something firmer beneath it now. I passed security. I showed my visitor pass. The clerk verified that I was told to wait here. I moved when you told me to move. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Several people nearby turned toward them. Jennifer stepped away from her desk. Officer Harlan, please. There is no security issue here. Harlan looked at her, then at Walter. His frustration had become visible. Sir, you need to stop challenging me. Walter's expression softened, almost sadly. Asking you to explain yourself is not a challenge. The words landed in the hallway like a weight. Harlan made a sudden dismissive gesture toward Walter, crossing a professional boundary in full view of the people around them. There was no struggle, no chaos, only a brief moment of stunned silence. The leather document sleeve slipped from Walter's hand and landed on the polished floor. The sound was surprisingly loud. Jennifer froze. One attorney stopped mid-sentence. Another person near the elevators turned completely around. Walter stood still. He did not raise his voice. He did not respond with anger. Instead, he looked down at the envelope, bent carefully, and picked it up. When he straightened, his face carried something more powerful than outrage. Disappointment. What are you trying to prove? Harlan asked, his voice lower now, as if even he sensed that something had changed. Walter brushed a small mark from the document sleeve and looked directly at him. Nothing. Harlan stared back. Walter continued, each word measured. I have spent 74 years learning that I do not have to prove my humanity to you. Nobody spoke. Jennifer's eyes shifted toward a security camera mounted above the hallway. Its indicator light remained on. Walter noticed it too. Then a woman wearing the credentials of a deputy United States Marshal approached from farther down the corridor. Sarah Collins had heard the final exchange. She looked first at Walter, then at Harlan, then at Jennifer. What happened here? She asked. Harlan started to answer, but Jennifer spoke first. Deputy Collins, I think you need to hear this from the beginning. Walter remained quiet, holding the envelope against his chest. Somewhere beyond the courtroom doors, footsteps were approaching. The recess had begun, and Marcus Bennett was about to walk into a hallway where his father had just learned exactly how differently dignity could be treated when nobody knew whose family you belonged to. Deputy United States Marshal Sarah Collins did not rush to judgment. She had spent enough years inside federal courthouses to know that the first version of an incident was rarely the complete one. She looked at Walter, then Jennifer, then Officer Harlan. "Mister, are you all right?" Walter nodded. "I am fine." Sarah noticed the visitor pass clipped clearly to his brown suit. "You were cleared through security downstairs?" "Yes, ma'am." Jennifer stepped closer. "I also told him he could wait here. He said he was delivering documents to his son during recess." Harlan exhaled impatiently. He kept challenging instructions and moving toward the courtroom. Walter looked at him. "I moved when you told me to move." Sarah raised one hand, ending the exchange before it could become another argument. "The hallway camera will establish what happened." Harlan's expression changed slightly. Above them, the security camera continued recording. Sarah turned back to Walter. "Who are you waiting for?" Walter adjusted the leather document sleeve beneath his arm. "My son." "His name?" "Marcus Bennett." Sarah became completely still. It lasted less than a second, but Jennifer saw it. Harlan did not. "Marcus Bennett?" Sarah repeated. "Yes. Assistant United States Attorney Marcus Bennett." Walter gave a small nod. "That is my son." Jennifer's eyes widened. Harlan looked from Sarah to Walter. "Wait. What?" Walter said nothing. He had never introduced himself through Marcus's title, and he was not going to begin now. To Walter, Marcus was still the boy who once practiced school speeches at the kitchen table while Evelyn corrected his posture. He was still the teenager Walter drove to debate tournaments before sunrise. He was still the young man who called after his first difficult case and admitted that knowing the law was easier than carrying its consequences. Federal prosecutor was Marcus's profession. It was not Walter's identity. Harlan seemed to search for words. "Why did you not say that before?" Walter looked directly at him. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" The question stopped him. Sarah's expression hardened, not with anger, but with understanding. "Officer Harlan," she said, "do not discuss this further right now." Harlan glanced toward the courtroom. "I was maintaining security." "Then the records will show that," Sarah replied. Her tone was neutral and professional. "And the records will show everything else." Walter appreciated that answer. No threats. No instant punishment. Just evidence. Procedure. Facts. The very things he had asked for from the beginning. Then the courtroom door opened wider. Several attorneys stepped into the hallway, speaking quietly as they reviewed documents. Harlan watched them pass, suddenly alert to every face. Walter remained where he was. He did not need to announce anything. The truth was already walking toward them. A tall black man in his early 40s emerged carrying a dark case file, dressed in a charcoal suit and conservative blue tie. He was speaking with another federal attorney when his eyes moved across the hallway. He saw Sarah first, then Jennifer, then Harlan. Finally, he saw the elderly man in the brown suit holding the familiar leather document sleeve. Marcus stopped. The professional concentration disappeared from his face and was replaced by immediate concern. "Dad." Walter turned toward his son. Harlan's face changed. Marcus crossed the hallway without looking at anyone else. "Are you all right?" he asked. Walter nodded slowly. "I am." Marcus studied his father's expression and knew immediately that the answer was more complicated than the words. He looked toward Sarah. She gave him a measured glance that told him this was not the place for assumptions. Marcus understood. He turned back to Walter first. "Tell me what happened." Before Walter could answer, Harlan stepped forward. "Counselor, there was a misunderstanding." Marcus looked at the officer's nameplate. Then he looked at the security camera above them. Finally, he met Harlan's eyes. His voice remained quiet. "Officer Harlan, I think we should let the evidence decide what this was." Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The hallway had already changed, not because he had threatened anyone, but because everyone now understood that the elderly man Harlan had dismissed was connected to someone the courthouse recognized immediately. That realization troubled Marcus more than it satisfied him. He turned to Walter. "Dad, start from the beginning." Walter glanced toward the courtroom door. "You have a proceeding." The judge called recess. "I have time." Walter nodded and described the morning in simple terms. The security screening downstairs, the visitor pass, Jennifer directing him to the benches, Harlan ordering him away, and his repeated offers to verify everything through proper channels. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Walter finished, Jennifer spoke. "I can confirm that. Mr. Bennett was cooperative." Sarah Collins added, "The hallway camera should provide a complete record." Harlan shifted his weight. I was doing my job. I did not know who he was. Marcus looked at him. For the first time, something sharper entered his expression. You keep saying that as though it helps you. Harlan frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus stepped closer to his father, not to Harlan. It means he should not have needed to be somebody important. The words were quiet. They carried anyway. Harlan looked around the corridor and seemed to notice, perhaps for the first time, how many people had witnessed the encounter. Marcus continued. My father passed security. He had a valid visitor credential. A court employee confirmed where he had been told to wait. If there was a legitimate security concern, there were procedures available to resolve it. Harlan opened his mouth, but Sarah intervened. This discussion should stop until a supervisor arrives. Marcus nodded immediately. Agreed. That response surprised Harlan. Perhaps he had expected Marcus to use his position like a weapon. Marcus did the opposite. He removed himself from the center of the decision. Deputy Collins, please preserve the relevant security footage. Jennifer, if you are comfortable doing so, provide a witness statement through the proper channel. Then Marcus looked at Harlan. Your full name and badge number, please. Harlan hesitated before giving both. Marcus wrote them on the back of a business card. No threat followed. No promise of punishment. He simply put the card into his pocket. Walter watched his son carefully. Years earlier, Marcus might have mistaken anger for strength. Now Walter saw something different. Restraint. The kind that required more discipline than retaliation ever could. Dad, Marcus said, I can leave for the day. Walter shook his head. No, you should not have to stay here after this. And you should not abandon your responsibility because someone else forgot theirs. Marcus almost smiled. It was exactly the kind of answer his father had given him his entire life. Walter handed him the sealed envelope. This is why I came. Marcus accepted it with both hands. Thank you. Walter lowered his voice. Do this correctly, son. Marcus understood immediately. I will. Not because I am your father. I know. And not because you are a federal prosecutor. Marcus held his father's gaze. I know. Walter nodded. Good. A courthouse security supervisor appeared at the far end of the hallway and approached Sarah. Harlan's posture stiffened. Marcus stepped aside, deliberately allowing the process to begin without him directing it. As the supervisor spoke quietly with Sarah and Jennifer, Walter sat back down on the bench where he had originally been told to wait. Marcus remained beside him for another moment. The reversal Harlan feared had finally arrived, but it did not look like revenge. It looked like something far more difficult to argue with. Witnesses, cameras, procedure, and a 74-year-old man who refused to let his dignity depend on his son's title. The courthouse security supervisor, Captain Thomas Avery, listened without interruption as Sarah Collins summarized what had happened. He did not ask Marcus for an opinion. He did not ask Walter what consequence he wanted. Instead, he requested the hallway recording, Jennifer Reed's statement, Walter's visitor record, and the security log from the first-floor checkpoint. Marcus watched from several feet away and said nothing. That silence was deliberate. He understood that the moment he tried to influence the outcome, the issue could become about his position rather than his father's treatment. Walter understood it too. Before returning to the courtroom, Marcus leaned toward him. I am going to stay out of their decision. Walter nodded. That is exactly what you should do. By late afternoon, the first review confirmed several facts. Walter had entered legally. His identification had been checked. His visitor pass was valid. Jennifer had specifically directed him to the fourth-floor benches. The security recording supported her account that Walter had complied when told to move away from the courtroom entrance. There had been multiple opportunities to verify his purpose without escalating the encounter. Officer Harlan was temporarily reassigned away from public-facing courthouse duties while an independent administrative review began. But the investigation did not stop with that morning. Captain Avery requested Harlan's prior complaint history, training records, and supervisory evaluations. Within days, reviewers discovered earlier complaints describing similar concerns, assumptions made too quickly, dismissive treatment of visitors, and interactions that became unnecessarily confrontational after people asked for explanations. Not every complaint had been sustained. Some lacked enough evidence to reach a conclusion. But together they raised a question the courthouse could no longer dismiss. Had warning signs been treated as isolated incidents because examining the pattern would have been more uncomfortable? Marcus learned about the expanding review through official channels. but he refused to participate beyond providing the basic facts he personally witnessed after leaving the courtroom. When a colleague asked whether he wanted to push for stronger action, Marcus shook his head. "That is not my decision to make." That evening, he sat with Walter at the kitchen table where he had once studied for college entrance exams. Evelyn's photograph remained near the window. Walter poured 2 cups of coffee and listened as Marcus explained that the review was widening. "They are looking at previous complaints," Marcus said. Walter stared into his cup for a moment. "Good." Marcus expected more. None came. "You are not angry?" he asked. Walter looked up. "Of course I am angry. Anger is easy." "Then what do you want?" Walter leaned back. "I want the next person who walks into that courthouse without an important last name, without a government title, without somebody powerful waiting behind a door, to be treated fairly." Marcus became quiet. Walter continued. "If the rules only work because your father was involved, then you have not fixed anything. You have only made an exception for me." Those words stayed with Marcus. 2 weeks later, courthouse leadership announced a broader review of visitor interaction procedures, complaint handling, supervisory accountability, and employee responsibilities when witnessing questionable conduct. Jennifer received formal recognition for cooperating fully with the investigation. Sarah helped develop clearer escalation procedures for security disputes. Harlan remained under review, with any final personnel decision left to the appropriate independent process. Walter asked for no apology ceremony and no public humiliation. He wanted something harder than revenge. He wanted change that would still exist after everyone forgot his name. And for the first time since that morning, Marcus understood that his father had not needed a federal prosecutor to rescue him. He had needed the system to become worthy of the principles it claimed to represent. 4 weeks later, Walter Bennett returned to the same federal courthouse on a clear Thursday morning. This time, nobody questioned why he was there. His name appeared on the guest list for a community forum on fairness, public service, and trust in government institutions. Yet as Walter passed through, security clipped another visitor pass to his jacket and entered the elevator. He found himself thinking about people whose names would never appear on any guest list. People who would enter buildings like this simply hoping to be heard. People who had no federal prosecutor in the family and no important title capable of changing the temperature of a room. When the elevator opened on the 4th floor, Walter recognized the polished hallway immediately. Jennifer Reed greeted him warmly near the clerk's station. Sarah Collins offered a respectful nod from farther down the corridor. Walter thanked them both and continued toward the assembly room without ceremony. Marcus was already inside, seated among attorneys, courthouse employees, community leaders, and local residents. He had deliberately chosen a chair in the audience. Today belonged to his father. When Walter's turn came to speak, he walked slowly toward the microphone wearing the same brown suit and Evelyn's navy tie. He looked across the room and remained silent for several seconds. "Something happened to me here 4 weeks ago," he began. "But I did not come back to tell you how important my son is." Marcus lowered his eyes. Walter continued. "I came back because after people learned what my son did for a living, the way they looked at me changed. Their voices changed. Their attention changed. Suddenly, people wanted to know whether I was comfortable. The room became still, and that bothered me." Walter rested both hands lightly on the podium. "Because I was the same man before they knew." He spoke about working for the county school system for 36 years. He spoke about raising a family with Evelyn, paying bills, helping neighbors, and teaching his son that law without dignity was only authority wearing better clothes. Then Walter looked toward Marcus. "My son becoming a federal prosecutor did not make me more worthy of respect. It only made certain people realize there might be consequences for forgetting that I already was." Marcus felt those words more deeply than any courtroom argument he had heard. Walter turned back to the audience. "I was 74 years old before anyone in that hallway knew my son's title. I was still 74 years worthy of respect before they knew it." No one applauded immediately. The silence came first. Not the frightened silence Walter had experienced weeks earlier, but the kind that happens when people recognize a truth they cannot easily escape. Then the room slowly rose. Marcus stood with everyone else, but Walter did not look triumphant. He looked peaceful. The independent review was still following its process. Procedures had been strengthened. Complaints were being reconsidered. Training was being revised. None of those changes could erase what had happened, and Walter did not pretend they could. but they could change what happened next. After the forum, father and son walked together toward the elevator. Marcus smiled. Mom would have liked that speech. Walter pressed the button. Your mother would have told me it was too long. Marcus laughed. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside together. Walter had entered that courthouse weeks earlier carrying an envelope for someone powerful. He left it now carrying nothing but the dignity he had brought with him from the beginning. Officer Harlan had believed power was standing somewhere behind Walter, waiting to walk through a courtroom door. What he failed to understand was that Walter's dignity had been standing directly in front of him the entire time.